Once again, technology. So the good and the bad.
Yeah. Maybe. So it makes me feel a little bit better because maybe I didn't screw this up yesterday.
No, you never accept the fault. That's the way.
That's yeah. Well, they don't work in marriage.
True.
That's the opposite. Of marriage.
Always accept fault. Tuck your tail back down.
But that's what they're always telling me in classes that this is not a joke. I tell them in my classes, I do not ask tricky questions. Who in their right mind would ask you tricky questions? And they say, Dr. McGee. And I said, well, he's so much smarter than me that I can't figure out how to ask tricky questions.
As critical thinking is what I always tell them is you have to read the question carefully because the sleight of tongue can get you to buy, igloo while you're living in Alaska. So if you sit there and read the question really carefully, everything you need is there.
Are you one of those guys that asked, of these choices, which, and then have like 3 choices?
Well, what gets them a lot of times, I'll have, not a true or false, but a multiple choice question, and there'll be 3 answers. 2 of the answers are generally pretty close, and then there's a none of these. And the none of these questions is what gets them a lot because it makes them doubt themselves. And I tell them I do that because I know a lot of students say it's a multiple choice exam or quiz or whatever, so I know the answer will be there. Well, not in every case. And so I always put some of these, none of these in there. So if you're going to answer that question, you have to know what that answer is instead of just kind of guesstimating.
So they'll be happy when they know I kind of held your feet to the fire, like called you out on it.
I'm used to it now.
I think it's good though. We need more of that. So Marcus, one of the things I know you're kind of specializing in right now is this artificial intelligence stuff. Mm-hmm. Some of the people listening to this podcast, me including, are probably inept to what is really going on in artificial intelligence. And the reason I put you on here is because you and I talk so much about this, mm-hmm. and you've educated me so much. We'll just start with the minimal. This chat GPT stuff is something that students were telling me about a year ago that I thought, no way. And if you're not familiar with chat GPT, can you give them a rundown of what chat GPT is?
Yeah, chat GPT is kind of let's just say it is what we use it for now is an automated assistant. So think of it, I'm using layman's terms for all this so it just makes sense. Think of it as Google on steroids. So Google, you think of it as a search engine. It can find the data for you, and then you click on the links and you're like, that's not right. And you click on another link and you're like, yep, this is what I was looking for. You can do all your digging. Well, chat GPT has kind of elevated this, and what it actually does is it will find that information to you and feed it to you in a method that makes sense for what you're asking. And the craziest part is the more you play with it in a session, the more you kind of define your parameters, sort of like a Google search engine. It'll actually define that answer for you in your own words and the way you want it. So think of it as Google on steroids, basically.
And people that are listening are thinking, okay, wait a minute. How does this relate to horses or agriculture? We're going to get there because it does, and you're doing some of that work, which I think is extremely cool. But just to get a general sense of this, let me put it in my terms, in layman's terms. This is this little program I can stick in, write me a 3-page paper on Abraham Lincoln, and by hitting enter,
it'll write it.
I now have a paper, 3 pages, on the subject matter of Abraham Lincoln.
And you can redefine it. You can go back in and say, add more about his life before, presidency, or add more about what he's done to the country, and it'll add those things in. And there's different little pieces to it where it'll actually add in sources for it. And you can make it spit out just about whatever you want to do. But there's one thing about it.
And that's with the free version.
That's the free version.
Yeah, it goes more complex than that.
Yeah, there's a paid version that can store all your sessions, and you can go back into those sessions, and it'll actually add in more context from what you had in there. So it loads it all into its own memory, and it will have more context of what you were talking about before, and it can just basically customize it just the way you want it. So it can be pretty advanced.
So here in our academic setting, the first thing that kind of puts the exclamation point on my head is students could utilize this to say, if you give them an assignment to write a paper on artificial insemination in dairy cattle industry, touch up a button or two, they're done. Whereas when you and I were in school, we had to go to the library and actually find the articles and put it together. And
the interlibrary loans to get the other journal articles and all of that. But now it is at the touch of a button, and that's what's kind of scary from the standpoint of academia, is that students realistically don't have to search anymore. The information is there. They can use this, like I said, Google on steroids, to actually find the information and write it for them. And so what we have to do as, instructors or professors is actually test those students on the spot. Because by allowing them to do it remotely or anything like that, they can use all these tools to find that information. But if you ask them to find that information and apply it, that's where it differs. And so I know the university has kind of an open policy on the use of generative AI in classrooms. So
It's very open, isn't it? It's almost like three choices.
Yeah.
Don't use it a little bit, or use it all
the
you
time.
want.
Yeah. And I'm not against its use in terms of looking for things and doing all that, but there's a couple things you got to remember. It's not always right, and it'll actually tell you at the bottom that it makes mistakes because it's kind of a predictive algorithm. It just predicts what should come next. And I asked it the weight of a dairy cow one time, and it said 13,000 pounds. And so little things like that might catch you off guard, and so when you're not reviewing it, it can kind of be a problem. But it does come in handy for editing documents. If you want to edit something or something like that, it's fine. So I think that's fine for a student use. We can get some cleaner papers to review. It can help you create an outline. It can do some things like that. But at the same time, there's a limit between, digital plagiarism and actually, using it as a tool. Using it as a tool is fine. But using it to just write it and make the thing for you, that's a different story.
And you just made a mention of something that we're doing. As of yesterday, I did it. I used the ChatGPT program to take my sales ads. The students wrote sales ads for our 7 yearlings that we're selling this year as part of the course. They wrote sales ads.
Yeah.
I took them, read them, graded them, and of course they're undergraduate student kind of work. So instead of spending a ton of time on my own, this sounds lazy, but I'm just admitting what I did. Stuck it in ChatGPT and said, hey, spice this up for me a little bit. Make it sound more complex, or make it sound more intriguing.
Yeah.
And boom, it does it.
It will definitely do it. It has this, and that's the thing, like I said, when customizing it, if it learns your language on the paid version, it learns your language, it will actually start to kind of train it to talk or write the way you would write it. And so you can have it super duper customized so it sounds like a Cavender release every time.
So we mentioned that's the free version. I know you're more interested in this, so you actually pay for a portion of this. And what are the additional things that you get from a paid version of this kind of AI?
The paid version allows, because I can't remember now, but the free version only allows you so many submissions over a certain time period. I can't remember the time period anymore. And the other thing is you can save your sessions. So if I'm working on getting prompts for a sales ad, and it's all about, the horse sale, and I'm having prompts about this, and I have all my information in there that I'm trying to get it to write, and I have it do my first one. And then 2 days later, I'm like, okay, I want to go back and kind of edit this. You go back to that session, and it has all the memory of what you were talking about. And you can literally just say, write me another sales ad, add this information, and it'll pull from what it learned before and put that into that ad again, and on top of what you're adding. And so it keeps that. It also allows you to get to a couple other GPTs, so you can get to one of my favorite is Consensus, which you can actually look up research articles. Now, it's not perfect, but it can kind of lead you down that rabbit hole. There's the Veed, which I also use, that makes videos based on, generated text.
They're just giving an idea. The other day, you and I were talking, and you said, let me show you how this works. And you typed in, give me a 45-second promotional video on Taking the Reins podcast, all about horses. And
in minutes.
Bingo, bango, we were on the track. Now, it wasn't perfect by any means, but it darn sure is something that would
it'll
cut down some time.
Yeah, that's the thing I think about. It is literally can be utilized as a workforce multiplier. So it'll allow you more time to do other things instead of just trying to come up with something off the top of your head. You can get kind of a list of what you should include, or you can kind of get a basic thing. You can get a very basic ad, and then you're like, okay, but I really want to focus more on this, and you can focus more on that and tell it to do it, and it'll do it. And you can add your own images, so it's still your product.
So you could take videos, like, let's go back to the sell horses. I could take videos of my sell horses, and stick those videos in, and this thing will help me create that.
Yep. And the voiceovers and all that, you can change all those to match the theme of what you're trying to do. So it literally is a good way to have a foundation for a product. I wouldn't say it's a good thing to use it to create the product, entirely, but to make that foundation, and then you can edit it and make it your own. That's a good thing to do.
So someone who has a problem with creativity, maybe, like, where do I start? I don't even know where to start. And I'll tell you, a year ago, that was me. Like, with all this social media stuff, I don't use it personally, and so I struggled. But the more I see some of these templates and creative kind of content that shows me where I can go with this, slowly but surely that content's building that way.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, and I'll just go back to like the general Chat GPT thing. If on the front end it seems scary, and I'll admit to you, a few years ago when it came out, I put some stuff in there, and I'm like, wait a minute, how is it knowing all of this? And so it freaked me out. And then you start digging into it, and you're like, this could become useful, And then you realize that there are literally programs that integrate these algorithms into themselves now. Even if you search on Google or Bing or something, it'll give you a AI-generated overview of stuff. Adobe Acrobat. If you go in Adobe now and you pull up an article, it'll say, give me an AI summary of that article. And so it's becoming more and more popular. And I think whether we like it or not, we're going to have to embrace some aspect of it. And realistically, in terms of just not generative AI, but in terms of artificial intelligence itself, we've been familiar with it, unbeknownst to us, for years. For Apple users with Siri, there's Cortana and Gemini now in Windows, all those different things. And they kind of do that. They look at what you're doing. They can have your task mapped out for the day. So they know at 8 o'clock, you normally put your phone on the charger. And so it can have a sequence set to say, okay, phone's on the charger, we're going to mute all this stuff. That is still some of that artificial intelligence, learning patterns. And that's all it is. It's learning patterns. And the great thing about it, the more you train it, the more information you feed it, then the better it gets. And so if at 8 o'clock you don't put it down and it knows for the last 2 years you've been doing that, it'll say, hey, isn't it about time to rest? And so it's...
it's funny. It's if you start thinking about the genre of movies we've had the past 30 years, it's almost like Hollywood's telling us something, isn't it?
Yeah.
Terminator seemed like a far-fetched movie, and it was entertainment and fun. Now they've ruined it because it's not so far-fetched.
Exactly. It's not too far from looking at like a humanoid robot now. I've been after a robot dog from Boston Dynamics for years now, and so it's not that far off. And they have Sony, I believe, makes the one with the facial expressions. I know. Elon Musk's team has some that they've been working on, and it's getting closer and closer. And I think we are worried about the rise of the robots or overtraining things. I won't say it's not impossible, but at the same time, I think there's still a lot to be gained from some of this. And once we get a better grasp on how to make this stuff usable instead of just doing it for the fun factor, I think we will see some real benefits from it.
It's just a shame. There's always evil that comes with good. You know? And so people are using this to scam other people. And so we all have to. I think that's probably a good point for this. This not just, we're going to get into the ag sector here in just a second, but the more people understand what can be done, they potentially could avoid a bad situation, a dangerous situation. So those are good points.
So that's like I said, there's always going to be something terrible that comes out of it, like in the academic setting, it's plagiarism. It's easy to just pop it in the Abraham Lincoln paper, have your paper printed out with sources and everything, submit that, and you're good to go. But that'll come back and bite the student later on. But at the same time,
not just easy but tempting.
It's tempting. It's right there. And I compare it back to the old services where you can send in, I don't know, $20 or $5, and somebody would write a paper for you, and then they send the paper to you. But now it's
Free.
Yep.
It's interesting. So let's take it and twist this a little bit different. You are working on some of the same kind of technology. Give us a little rundown, if you will, of kind of how can we take this in a good way and plug it into the livestock sector and use for labor efficiency, management practices. What kind of opportunities are out there?
Yeah, and so there's a whole field. There's what we call precision agriculture. And in that precision agriculture, they're using these tools. So robotics, of course, everybody's kind of probably seen the robotic tractors and the GPS controlled tractors now. So you have robotics, you have computer vision, which is actually using camera systems to locate things. There is the artificial intelligence, which is actually gaining that knowledge from whatever's seeing or something like that. And so all that's under that big umbrella of precision agriculture. Then within that same umbrella, there is precision animal management or precision livestock farming. And so that's kind of the area I work in. And within that is using these same types of technology for, like you said, increased husbandry practices. Those are kind of my big thing.
So let me break this down. So we got these two categories, and I think it's very accepting what you just said of row croppers been using this technology for a long time. I'm not a row cropper, but from what I understand, they get in a cab tractor, turn on the AC and the radio, set the GPS, and have a good time almost.
Yeah.
But now, and I think that with technology of tractors and blah blah blah, that seems acceptable. But we can do some stuff on the animal side too.
Yep, and that's the thing. Now the livestock side, it significantly lags compared to agronomy and horticulture. It does. And if you think about the way the livestock industry is set up, it's not a uniform operation all the time. With the row crop, you have your plot of land, and you know the boundaries, and your plants hopefully are not going to move anywhere but up. In the animal situation, if you're trying to go get some horses out of the paddock or something like that, those horses are probably going to be like over here one day, the next day they're going to be in a different area. And so you have to train for it to find horses, identify horses, then you have to figure out how to bring them up. Now horses are a little bit different. I'm not the horse handler guy, but you can bring a bucket out there and they'll come up to the bucket, but at the same time, if you approach them too fast or too slow, they're going to react differently. And so kind of getting those guidelines and boundaries around how to handle that from an autonomous standpoint, using robots or something like that, takes a lot of data generation to actually get it trained. And so that's kind of the area I'm working in. So handling animals, we've done a little thing that's been kind of broadcast through the university using it's called the Clear Path Warthog to actually move some calves, some dairy calves that are less than 6 months old. And we actually moved them around pasture, but that was remotely controlled. I used my knowledge of animal handling and used the robot to act as a human.
And what does this robot look like? Like it on tracks? Or?
Yeah, it is a massive, I think it's 4 foot by 4 foot quad-wheeled robot. And so it looks like a tank almost without the tracks. And it's kind of semi-amphibious, so it should be able to float through water. And it's a big beast of it. It's called the Warthog for a reason. And on top of that, the researchers at CAVS that I collaborate with, they have a computer stack that has GPS, LiDAR. So LiDAR kind of generates a point cloud of information, so it can actually tell you where everything is by pixel. What else? GPS, LiDAR, tons of memory, onboard Wi-Fi. Anything you can think of, basically. 360 cameras, stereo cameras. And so we captured all that data, and I think a 15-minute run was, I want to say 5 or so gigabyte of data. So it captured a lot of data in a very short time period. And the beauty of that is you capture that data, and you see the approach angle of the robot, you see how the animals react. What you can do then is say, okay, when I'm this close to the animals at this angle, the animals move this way, using basic, behavioral animal handling knowledge. And then you can start to program the robot to say, hey, this is a cow. That's the first thing it needs to know. And through an algorithm, you need to tell it, this is a cow. This is a group of cows. When you approach this group of cows at this angle, the group typically moves this way. And so that little spot right there is where we differ from, say, agronomy, because typically those animals, if you approach them on that, that left side or whatever, they're going to move the opposite way. But you're going to have some that are stubborn, and they're going to go the other way, and they're going to break up that herd.
But you got to teach a robot how to drive a cow, just like trying to teach students where you're supposed to be on the hip or the barrel or in the neck.
You got to have enough of that information in there in that algorithm so it can retrain itself or actually know to, okay, I can let this one go for a little bit and I can swing back and catch it later. Or if I back off and relieve some of that pressure, it'll actually catch up with the rest of the herd while it's completing its mission to move the main group over to another corner. And so it's difficult to get that type of intricate, training in that algorithm to have a robot do all that on its own.
Now, while that's interesting, what is the practical application of that? What can a farmer or rancher be interested in anything about a robot herding cattle for him?
So on my side of things, that's the what I call the shiny thing. You have a robot out in pasture moving cattle. But you remember what I said before, you're collecting data on 360 video, you're collecting stereoscopic video, so from the two cameras, LiDAR, you can even have a thermal camera attached to it. And my big thing is illness detection. So with that thermal camera, you can look at temperature of individual animals, right? So while you're just moving your animals around the pasture, what you're actually doing is you're becoming a pen rider. So you're getting that data and you're creating longitudinal data of every time you move that animal. And with those stereoscopic cameras, that's just regular old, video like you take with your phone. You can watch gait. So you can do some gait analysis of those animals. And over time, you might see that gait change. And so if you train to look for changes in gait or changes in temperature, and you can have temperature recorded from the environment, you can know early on that, hey, this animal's gait is kind of tightened up, or this animal's gait has gotten loose or is slow now. It's normally in the middle of the pack or the front of the pack. Now it's always the last one. You can do some early illness detection. And so I think that is where it will really, really shine. And there's companies that are working on some of those algorithms, as well as doing body condition scoring from top-down views. And so there's a lot of resources out there there's a lot of things that we can utilize this technology for that are being underappreciated right now. And I think once this gets to the point where it is, one, affordable, from robots on the farm, the ones that I'm asking for are very expensive, and I'm always one, I'll say I get the highest quality thing, and I'll trickle it down to a production level. So what do we actually need?
When you think about that, though, like I remember the first flat screen TV I bought, it was a 42-inch Samsung.
Probably $1,000.
It was in 2006. I bought my first home in 2006, was proud of it, so I'm going to buy me a nice TV. $2,200.
Oh, yeah.
Today you can buy that a way better TV, much bigger,
like
better technology
bucks,
for $300.
Yeah.
So this is probably where this robot thing is going to go eventually.
Yeah, and I think because the way I look at it, on the movement side, yes, you need a robot. But even if you don't use robotics, if you have a sensor suite attached to your side-by-side, so you go out and move your animals with the side-by-side, and you have the cameras on there and maybe a thermal camera or something on the side-by-side, you can buy a thermal camera to hook up to your cell phone now and use your cell phone as a thermal camera, And so you have all this power on you, and I'm trying to figure out what's the cheapest way to get this done. And so the robot is just a platform. If you want to do it on horseback, you might have a vest that you put on, and the vest has the cameras on it, or a helmet that has the cameras on it. And all you're doing is collecting that data. And once you collect that data for, in this case, early illness detection or gait analysis, you have longitudinal analysis of individual animals once you train to know, this is 847, this is 746, for however long you're doing it.
Drones would seem to be pretty effective.
Drones, yeah. Drones, you can get aerial view and you get, 4K resolution, so you can zoom all the way down and see an individual ear tag in some cases. And so if you can do that, you can actually capture a lot of data in a short amount of time. There are regulations on how close the drone can be, aerial drones can be to animals, because it's like a disturbance thing. They're not, and I don't believe there are any kind of regulations in terms of ground drones right now, And that's something that me and my collaborators actually want to kind of investigate and maybe set some guidelines. Because for proper handling techniques, you don't have to run after the animal with the, whatever platform you're using. You should be able to kind of shift them the same way you use low stress handling when you're working, in my case, cattle in general. So.
And primarily what you're discussing here to me seems like the software application of all that's the important part. So if you're gathering all this data as a rancher, you don't have time to sit down and thumb through all this. You're expecting a software program to go, hey, pay attention to this heifer because she's not acting the same way she was yesterday or whatever it may be.
And so, the software side of it is the big piece. And the data, like I mentioned before, the data collection is massive. And it depends on what all you're looking for, but it can be massive. And that's where artificial intelligence comes into play. You can have it trained to comb through that data and find exactly what you need. And you can have parameters around whatever the gait analysis. You have to have your healthy animals and your animals that you're questioning, But you have data around those animals that whole time. And once it's actually trained, doesn't matter. It will actually find what you're looking for. And so not only the sensor side, but also having the AI there to assist you in combing through the data. And that's what a lot of AI is used for now. It's combing through large amounts of data. I wouldn't be surprised if some of these big Chase Bank and Wells Fargo is heavily utilizing some of the AI to comb through data and find little things.
That's an interesting thing. So let's think about, as we talk, I'm trying to think of application of the horse world. And one of the things you mentioned immediately piques my interest, and that's gait analysis. Within the horse world, show world, obviously I deal with the stock horse side, but I mean, we're talking dressage, over fence horses, race horses. All horses are supposed to be an athlete to some capacity. And so in the performance horse world, one of the things that we have to be very cautious about is welfare. And welfare means not only treatment of the animal, but training practices and even how I advance that horse into a performance setting. So for instance, as a responsibility as a judge, I have to evaluate every horse that comes in the pen all day long, every day, and make it a quick analysis of that horse's gait. And based on where it's at, if it's, we'll just say for ease of reference here, if it's bad, then I have to kick it out. I can't compete. If it's not terrible, it's acceptable. We'll say acceptable. If it's an AAEP score of 2 or less, I can keep it. But here's where the hard part is one, no owner who paid all that money to go to a horse show wants to hear that his horse isn't
kicked out.
And they may disagree. If it's riding that line between a 2 and a 3, it's riding the line. They may, well, that's a 2. It's acceptable. It's not consistent. It's not consistently observable. And I go, yes, it is. And there's a disagreement. So this sounds like an opportunity where we could use some of this capability. I'm not sure how, but we could program software to say this is acceptable, this is not, in terms of how this horse is moving. Simply have the horse come down the alley and approaching the arena, quickly scan the horse, and bingo bango, it's made a determination.
And that's the thing. The way it works with the computer vision side is you have to kind of segment out what you call like regions of interest. And so in that case, you'd be looking at, joints and feet, basically. I always say joints and feet. So you have joints and feet, and when they're walking through, it looks at angle of flexion. So it looks at how they go and how far they are apart and how steady they are. And it might hit up top as well, kind of the shoulder area, right? And it will look at that, and what you have to do there is I'll just say you have 50 horses go through. So have 50 horses go through, and out of those 50 horses, 35 of them look pretty much exactly the same. They're all off a little different, but they look exactly the same pretty much to the computer. And then you have 10 come through that look really off compared to the other 30. So it created a class. It would already split that data and said, this is class A and this is class B. Then you have another set that comes through that kind of ride the middle of it. And so now it says this is class A because they all look the same. This is class B because they're way different, but class C is riding the fence.
Now you're talking about judging.
Oh, well,
That's going to take our job right there.
Well,
It could do that.
Well, here's the thing, though. That has to do that in real time takes some processing power, and so you have to have the algorithm trained and trained to a T, to not kind of bias itself towards individual horse coats or size or something like that. So it needs to see a variety of animals to get kind of trained to say, okay, this is a horse, this is a palomino, this is whatever. And then after it sees all those different coat colors and all those different things, one of them might have one sock, and so it might kind of throw it off and like, whoa, this is different, And so once it gets past that point and says, okay, doesn't matter what color it is, doesn't matter if it has socks or not, this movement is what I'm watching. Then it can look at just tracking distances between that. And then it has to kind of take into account the environment. As long as the environment's kind of the same, not different colors, or, you have say for instance, they're on concrete for some reason, then they're in an arena, It has to kind of take those environments into account. And then at that point, running it through and being able to make those decisions and flag things in real time, that takes a little bit of processing power.
But you're really leveling the playing field. The more I think about this, the thing that defines a great horseman from a good horseman is great horsemen, through experiences in their lifetime, have figured out what good or excellent. They figured out the definitions between excellent, good, average, and poor quality of movement or performance is. And so they can see through some things that the novice or average horseman can't, to say that's the horse I want. And it's those experiences. I've had them happen where I see a horse and I know, like, I need that one.
Yeah, yeah.
And other people may not go, they'll go, what for? I see something, right? So this thing could level the playing field to say, it could be on your phone and you could just scan a horse in movement and say, thumbs up or thumbs down.
Exactly. And that's
I'm thinking in terms of lameness, but you're taking it in a whole other direction in terms of quality of movement.
Yeah. And that's what, in terms of just pure lameness, because lameness will have a defined change in gait. And you'll have enough animals that are healthy to say, good, 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 and it will just flag this next and say, this is different. And it won't say lame, it says, this is different, this is outside of our parameters of these other 30 horses that we saw. And so that can give you, reason to further investigate that horse. And that's one thing I will say. I'm hesitant to say trust it 100%, because like you mentioned before, you can look at it because you've had the experience and you can look at them like, I need that one. Whereas I go out with zero experience and I'm like,
horse is a horse.
A horse is a horse.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, I don't want that one because this one kind of prances a little bit different or whatever, right? But you're like, yeah, it's prancing because something's wrong with it.
We don't use the term prancing.
Well, you know what I mean. But it's moving differently. But, that's the way it is, because in layman's terms, you are a well-trained algorithm that can identify things in real time. I am Chat GPT or YOLO version 1 that is trying to look at this and make a split-second decision based on 10 observations. And so I can make that decision, but it doesn't mean that I'm trained enough to know the background of why. I just said these 10 or these 30 look good, these 10 look bad. And I don't know why, but you will know why, and because you've had more experience. And so the algorithm can then be trained by adding more and more of that training data
refining it.
And refining it so it can become that well-trained algorithm.
That's wild. And sitting here thinking about the vets. A vet who may specialize in large animal but not be like fine-tuned in the area of equine lameness. If you had an app on your phone, could simply scan a horse in motion. I'm sitting here thinking, like, most vets come out, hey, what's wrong with your horse? I don't know, he's off somewhere. And so they start lunging them and tracking them and looking at them and analyzing, and they can narrow it down. But sometimes it goes to the simply to blocking off a joint. Horse is still lame, so well, not that joint. So it's this process of elimination, whereas the use of this kind of software,
you can quantify it
pretty dang quick. And where exactly?
And like I said, it's there, and I'm definitely interested in doing some work around that. And the beauty of it is, what I like to say is multiple streams of data. So we have the video, with the machine learning attached to it, so computer vision there. But also, if you have a pressure mat, and so you can have that pressure mat set up, and it'll provide you with a stream of data saying, it's kind of laying off of that front left limb or whatever. And then maybe you have something else on top of that. You have, video of them actually being lunged, versus just walking in pasture. Because they may not show it when they're in pasture, but when they're lunged, they actually kind of show a little bit more.
Right.
And so you have those multiple streams, and that's the way you kind of start to specify what it is. Because if you depend on one thing, you have a temperature, that means you have, I don't know, endometriosis. You can't go that far. You have to kind of have that temperature. You need to do some swabs or whatever else, and then you can kind of figure out what's going on to go from that standpoint and say, yes, this is a defined thing based on these parameters. And it won't be right all the time, but it'll at least give a professional or a novice an idea of something they should look for.
The more we talk about this, we started discussing this, you were kind of training me to use it in social media creation and stuff like this. And the more we talk about this, and I see what you're doing with the dairy industry and robotics and all this stuff, I think the average livestock animal science guy would probably leave horses out, most of the time. But there's such a great application here.
That's what I was going to say. The horses are realistically the perfect application for this, because a couple things.
You want to know who will pay for this technology?
Who's that?
Horse people.
Yeah.
Because, because they will. Yeah. I mean, you think about the racehorse industry.
Yeah, that's a more money than I ever see industry. And the thing is, with that, and the reason I look at the species itself, own horses, is because they're handled all the time. All the time. You can do whatever you kind of want to do to them for, well-trained horse. And if you want to capture stuff, you can literally set that animal up, and you can create that controlled environment that I was talking about that we lack in most other industries, right? You can have that animal in the ring and lunge them. You can have the animal stand in one spot and capture 360-degree images of it. And so you can do that.
Not just like a cow. You got to push a cow around and hope for the best.
Yeah.
Or a pig or whatever.
And so, and I mentioned before, there's a group on campus that does some stuff with athletes, and they want to do some stuff with livestock. And I mentioned equine as the way to go, because it's basically putting a sock on there, and that sock has sensors that measures joint flexion and all that and pressure. And I'm not doing that with a cow. Cow will destroy that, especially beef cattle. It'll be gone in 2 seconds.
And when you add in the human factor to human athletics and the model systems for that, and I'm not expert in the human kinesiology, physiology side, but I can't think of a animal
species. Yeah, they are athletes. That's what they are. They are athletes. They are supposed to perform. And so from that you can measure all these things. And like you mentioned, the racehorse side of things, measuring gait, like longitudinally, so over years of training, all this data. Then from that, you can make some genetic selection based on that animal, Or you can say, hey, if we keep running them at this rate, we're only going to have, 2 more years of good, races out of them before this ligament starts to go.
Right.
And you can kind of cut back and say, well, I'm not going to put them in all of these races. I'm going to keep them up, but I'll cut them back so I can keep them around.
Or reduce training.
Yeah, reduce
or
training.
Whatever it may need to be to keep that animal together.
Providing supplements.
Man, I didn't even consider that in our previous discussions, but when you look at the racehorse industry and the number of breakdowns that they've had and the media attention that it draws and the welfare concerns that it puts a spotlight on, if there's a way to use this kind of technology to limit or reduce the amount of that kind of problem, that's big business.
And I'm willing to bet that there are a few companies out there that, if not working on it, have it in place, but it's probably crazy expensive, But I know that it is possible. And like I like to say, with this new turn of everything, anything is possible. It doesn't mean it's plausible, but anything is possible to do. And it might be a little bit crazy to get the information, but as time goes on, I'm guaranteeing that we'll be able to sit out there with a couple cameras, get the animals just walking, and it'll be able to spit out some stuff after, training it.
Or your cell phone.
Or your cell phone.
What can you not do on a cell phone? I keep thinking that, what is Apple going to... We don't need an iPhone 16. And they always come out with something to draw you to the next iPhone, you know?
Yeah, and that's the thing. You got so much computing power in your pocket at any given time. And some of these algorithms I mentioned are meant to run on mobile platforms. And so if you have a iPhone in your pocket, you can literally grab that and hold it up there, because you think about it, the cameras are great, because that's where you're collecting some of this from the computer vision side. Cameras are great. I mentioned you can buy a FLIR module to plug in the bottom of it and have a thermal camera. So you got those two things. And if you have environmental monitors in your barn or wherever, you can pull all that data in and have one big stream of data, but you need artificial intelligence to comb through it for you. And boom, you start creating this individual animal profile over the lifetime of that animal that can make a difference in terms of how you manage it, what you utilize it for, and how long you utilize it for at that level of rigor.
Let me add one more nuance here and tell me if this is plausible, but one of the things we do at the world, especially I think two places, like big show level, they're concerned about drug testing.
Yeah.
Anybody who buys a horse who's been around the block a little bit is concerned about potential drug alteration of the attitude of this horse, while I look at him versus I get him home and then there's a problem. Do you see any arena that this could be utilized? Like, I think, okay, if a horse is drugged, he's going to hang his head a little different. He's going to hang his tail a little different. He's going to hang his ear a little different. He's going to have a little different look in his eye.
Yeah.
So this could possibly be something that software could pick up too, as far as.
And so the behavioral side of things that one's tricky. So to put that in perspective, I'm working on something now with my grad student looking at estrus behavior, so mounting behaviors. And we can pick it up because we're getting a snapshot of this, animal on top of animal. If you're looking at behavioral indicators for a disposition, that's going to take in multiple metrics, right? And so you're going to have, like you mentioned, his head's going to be droopy, maybe moving slower or something like that. That's going to be a little bit more difficult to do. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's going to I bet you'd have a lot more false positives, because you'll have some animals that might look down and have his, tail head up or tail head down or something a little bit different than the normal horse that's standing tall and proud. And it will flag and say it has two of these three parameters that you're looking for. Maybe you need to examine it. And so what you have to do then is train it based on that. And like I say, I always stress multiple streams of data. So have that and maybe have some heart rate in there, or something like that to kind of give you another metric to kind of examine. So if you have all those things and it pings all three metrics and has increased heart rate or decreased heart rate or something like that, then you might be able to kind of go for some testing for that application.
Interesting stuff. And I think there's a lot of room for growth. And that's what makes research exciting is when you feel that sense of you're on the front end and there's this great potential for expansion. That's a fun place to be in.
And that's the way I look at it. I'm like, the way to do it is let's try it and see what happens. Like you mentioned with the drug testing, that's something I never even thought about. And so that's running through my head now of how would you do that to have it accurately detected. And then I was thinking about the metrics behind it. And I'm sorry for jumping around a little bit, but this is the other side of it. We're worried about, robots taking over and machine learning and all that. But here's the thing. Even if I was some guru at machine learning, which I am not, I'm a novice. If I wanted to do this for you, for detecting, drugs in the horse, I need somebody with the knowledge to actually identify those behaviors. Now, true enough, I can type in and search and find that, but it's going to give me 50 different things. But you might be able to look at that and say, yeah, but that can happen when this is going on. Yeah, I wouldn't look at that because that's not a good indicator. And so you still need that human input. And For now. But I always say we look at it as, by having the mind behind that machine, you can look at it because it will give you data regardless. It's like you running statistical software. It'll give you output, but it's up for you to kind of decide whether or not, I trust this or not. And after you train it enough, you can feel more, secure in trusting its output. And so I think that's that is something to do in terms of like your drug, providing drugs to horses, finding all those different behavioral metrics, and then adding in a couple other things as like covariates basically, and then you probably be able to find something.
I think you could.
Mm-hmm.
So here's my last question, just because of time here. So with all that stated,
Mm-hmm.
let's skip down the road 10 years, which is a long time in the arena of research.
Mm-hmm.
10 years. Where do you think, where could you envision, and this could be very dreamy, okay? It could be something like, this is going to sound crazy, but
Yeah.
where do you think this is going to go eventually?
You want my honest opinion?
I want because I know you're a deep thinker. I know you are.
I think more right now that there are going to be a lot more stringent rules put towards publishing data. That's kind of where I look. In terms of the technology, I think the technology is going to be there where it's going to be little startup people like me trying to do this, and you can post your training data and all this so it can help somebody else. But at the same time, what's going to stop me from going online? I'm trying to do lameness detection. I find 1,000 other researchers doing lameness detection. They post their training data. I grab all of their training data, run it through my algorithm, say, hey, my algorithm's better. And I think that's where we're going to go. And I think we're going to start to see some of that dark side of it. But in terms of the tech itself, I think one thing that's going to really happen is the cost of the equipment is going to go down because, anything you think about now besides the actual phones in our pocket has gone down in cost. You can buy a really nice computer now for $300, $400 that can do all the stuff we're talking about, And I think the cost of the equipment is going to go down. There's going to be some outliers. There's going to be some really high-end stuff. The cost of the equipment is going to go down. We're going to see the inclusion of AI in more arenas in general. So you will actually see it probably recording data at horse shows, just recording data. They may not even know what they're going to do with it yet, but they will have it. And then you'll see it at operations in general where they just have a top-down view of pigs or cows or whatever, just to have the data. Then you'll have researchers on the back end being able to grab that data and dig through it from different reasons. So I think we're going to realize that, hey, you know what? As long as we have this data here, we can look for whatever we want. So while you're getting gait analysis data, somebody else is looking at temperature data, if you had thermal on there, temperature data. And they're going to be able to pull that stuff, and you did it all with your iPhone, probably, 22 at that point. 22 just sitting at the shelf. And on top of that, I really think that some of this telehealth stuff is going to go crazy. Like I mentioned, in terms of thermal and just general artificial intelligence, you sit there and you call your doctor, say, hey, my nose is running, I'm kind of sick, and you might take a little blood prick or something, run it through there. It'll have like a little snap test built in. It'll read that. You take a thermal image of yourself, and it might be able to spit out some of that information. And it can look at eyes and all that stuff because it's coming.
It reminds me of remember the Silicon Valley woman that claimed that she could take a blood test and do all this stuff, and it was a scam. It was just a bunch of mess. But it's plausible.
It's coming. It is coming. Or maybe she was right. No, she wasn't right.
No,
but
she didn't get it done. I think her theory might be interesting, but she didn't get it physically done. But
and I think it's coming. I think the tech is burgeoning right now. It's starting to come to the point where we're seeing some of the outputs of it, and we're wondering where to go next with it. And that's the point in which I'm glad that I'm in, because right now it is kind of wild, wild west, because we're trying things and seeing if it can do this and seeing what it can and can't do. And if it can't do it, we literally ask it, how could you do this? What do I need to do? And it tells you what it needs. And so we're getting to that point where we'll be able to do a lot. I won't say anything, but we'll be able to do a lot using artificial intelligence in the next 10 years. It's going to be in your vehicles more than ever. It's going to be in livestock management more than ever. And we're already seeing it take over. They have machines that will pick strawberries right now, and that's like a manual thing that takes, because you can't just grab and
It's
squeeze
tactile,
it.
yeah.
And so there is a lot of that, and I think in terms of human health, there's a lot that can be done. So you think about people with prosthetics. There's going to be a lot of application across the board, and so I think once we start to see it in agriculture blossom even more, we see it in the livestock industry. We'll probably end up seeing it in the medical field. In terms of number crunching, it'll be in the banks and all these other things. It's gonna be a big thing and included even more than we know.
Dr. McGee, you are an interesting fellow.
I wouldn't say that, but
And
try.
I'll tell you, this is no news. Everybody who listens knows you know, like, one of the most pleasant people in our department, always in a good mood, always optimistic. And I knew you'd be a good fit for the podcast because you bring in some intelligence, but also some optimism. And because you could get pessimistic about all
Yeah.
this, especially if you've watched movies since the 80s.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you doing all that. Maybe we'll have a follow-up next time you got some good information about something you're dabbling in the research side. We'd like to hear it.
Yeah, I'll bring it in.
Thank you for your time.
All right.
Thank you for joining us on Taking the Reins. A special thank you goes to the Mississippi State Extension Service and the MSU Animal and Dairy Sciences Department. Please visit us on Facebook and Instagram at Taking the Reins Podcast.